Right, morning guys. Just a short video that Sam and Jules are gonna present for you with some slides at the end on carbohydrate loading. It's pretty appropriate this week with everyone doing the long distance weekend, and we're going to try and get this out to you on the Tuesday, so you've all got time to take it on board and start using it either from the Wednesday or Thursday, depending on what's right for you. They're going to produce a slide at the end that's a really good takeaway. We'll make sure that everyone gets access to that, but I think what the guys are going to do is provide some context around that slide now. Just some real sensible advice and, you know, what you should and shouldn't do when you're trying to get ready for a long duration event like a triathlon. So, you know, this will be useful going forward into races as well as this weekend, just with a little bit of adaptation that I know the guys are going to cover off. So I'll pass you over to whichever one of you two wants to kick us off.
Yeah, cool. Cheers, Phil. So I think, like you kind of alluded to, the main thing that we need to think about here is that whilst this is an event, it's going to take place over 3 or 4 days. So in terms of carbohydrate intake, hydrations, a lot of the kind of key principles are still important, but they don't necessarily need to be applied quite as you would when you're preparing for a race, let's say.
So you mean, like, obviously this is spread over several days, so well, first, I suppose we could talk about when you'd start doing this, and is there a difference between with a race? Would you start a little earlier because it's all got to happen to be loaded up for one day, and this is more about continual loading?
Yeah, so with in preparation for a race, we might start 48, 24 hours certainly before the event. So that being said, you know, the day before the swim, the bike and the run that we're going to be doing this weekend, we still need to be sure that we're kind of loading up on the carbs, let's say. So there's going to be a focus on carbohydrate intake through probably each meal in the day before each of the events. But particularly, like, the evening meal is going to be really important as well. So we're looking for high carbohydrate content of that evening meal. I guess what we're aiming to do really is make sure that our body is fully carbohydrate stocked, if we like. So our muscles are going to be full of carbohydrate, or glycogen, as most of us be aware it's called, and the stored form of carbohydrate. So to do that, what we really want to do is focus on having 50 to 60, probably 60% of our calories, let's say, from carbohydrate, and maybe even upwards of 70%, to be honest. So if we're focusing on high carbohydrate foods, you know, pizza, great pre-race, pre-event kind of meal.
Perfect.
Perfect, yeah, works for the Brownlee, so why not for us? You know, pasta, rice, bagels, potatoes are going to form a large part of our diet in that case. Probably one thing we want to think about as well is actually reducing potentially the amount of fat that we're actually taking in as well. So we don't want to just overeat in terms of trying to increase our carbohydrate intake, but think about reducing the amount of fat that we might be taking in as well. So if, you know, for example, if we had pasta, sauce and cheese, then we might want to reduce or even take away that cheese in the evening meal, for example. As a kind of recommendation, from a kind of carbohydrate recommendation point of view from the literature, what we probably want to aim at is 7 to 10 grams of carbohydrate per kilo of body weight.
Yeah, I personally find that like a really easy number to use, rather than worrying about percentage of calorific intake, which, if you're not monitoring your calories anyway, I think that's a really nice, neat number. It's just printed on the back of most packages, isn't it? You can work that out pretty easy. So
yeah, that's exactly right. You can work out what that actually involves, how many carbs are in your pasta, whatever it is that you're taking in, and then just do a quick calculation to work it out for yourself based on your body weight. And that, you know, that goes for either the meal before or even the day before. We're aiming at that 7 to 10 grams of carbohydrate per kilo of body weight as well. And probably the other thing to think about is just maintaining good levels of hydration throughout the day before as well. So, you know, just drink regularly. You can include some electrolytes in your bottle as well, but you don't need to over drink either. We don't want to be super overhydrated, let's say, prior to doing any of these events, but we just need to listen to our bodies and hydrate accordingly, really.
Yeah, good. So like that sort of covers off the day before, you know, like obviously like even the morning of the event, or actually this, you know, this weekend, you know, each of the mornings, you know, what should people be eating? You know, some pretty basic advice around that would be pretty good. You know, what should they be aiming at in terms of like how much of it to eat?
Yeah, so in the morning, you want to be, again, favouring carbohydrates really is where you're going to get what you're going to kind of include in that meal or snack if it's not in the morning. But yeah, 1 to 2 hours before you start, you want to be having a high carbohydrate meal. Again, this is important, as Sam said, just to really kind of top up those glycogen or carbohydrate stores in our body, just to make sure that we're starting whatever event we're doing sort of fully stocked and ready to go, as it were, with carbohydrate. In terms of a number and what you want to be aiming for, you're looking at 2 to 4 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight again. So again, a really simple kind of calculation based on, you know, the amount of carbs in whatever it is you're going to have. In terms of what carbohydrates might be a good choice at this point, because we're kind of talking 1 to maybe a little bit longer kind of out from starting, a really good option is a low glycemic index carbohydrate. And by that we mean a slow release carbohydrate. So a low glycemic index carbohydrate is going to be absorbed more slowly, and the carbohydrate, the energy from that, is going to be released more slowly. So it's a more sustained kind of release of energy over that time before we get started. So good options there are things like a big bowl of porridge with banana and honey or something, toast, bagels, make a good option there. So yeah, you want really to focus in on the carbohydrate and try and keep that meal low fat, low protein, and also low fiber as well is quite important when we kind of think about any GI issues we want to avoid as well. So GI being gastrointestinal, we don't want any stomach issues or anything while we're swim, bike or running. That kind of period before is also a really good time just to top up our hydration as well. Again, don't see it as an opportunity to overdrink, but again, just sip on an electrolyte drink during that 1 to 2 hours beforehand. So 500 mils to up to a litre or so is probably a good opportunity to kind of get that in. And I think a lot of people will instinctively do that before the bike or the run, but don't overlook that kind of period before the swim as well. So although it might feel cold when you get into the water, even if it is, you know, upwards of about 16 degrees hopefully now, you know, when you're getting into the water, it might still feel chilly, but by the time you get going in a wetsuit as well, you really are going to sweat quite a bit. So really consider your hydration before the swim as well, because you want to avoid any kind of cramp and dehydration during that swim as well.
Cool. I mean, it all sort of like, basically you're using this day, aren't you, to top up from what Sam was just talking about the day before. Really, the day before is critical. If you get that right, this is a top up, isn't it? You know, you don't want to be having to force fluid down you in the morning and force food in to get through it. You should be near enough there. This is, like you said, just topping up like liver glycogen and you know, making sure you are still hydrated. So yeah, good stuff. So like obviously, you know, we'll sort of talk about it under normal circumstances where, you know, you do all that, you do your swim, you'd get on the bike. Now, obviously, people will be starting this a little bit different this weekend, but if we stick to the traditional principles, people will still like pick up on how much they should be fueling. Because even this weekend, to me, you know, how you fuel during a long bike session on the Saturday is going to have a major impact on your recovery for the run on the Sunday. So the principles all apply. It's just the time scale skewed a little, isn't it? So you know, like what would you generally be looking to like get through on the bike on Saturday, or maybe you could even start with, you know, what would you consume straight after the swim on the Friday, and how that impacts into the bike on the following day.
Yeah, so if we're then thinking about the swim and we've completed the swim, it's going to be you know, irrespective of the distance we're doing, it's still going to be burning a lot of carbohydrate. So, you know, within that 1 to 3 hour period after we've done the swim, we need to make sure we're having a carbohydrate rich meal. Yeah, easy for me to say.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's really important to begin that storage again and replenishment of carbohydrate levels, ready to then start the bike the next day in a good position. So we've got our muscles topped up, let's say, and then when we wake up in the morning, again, like Jules said, we'll focus on just a little top up, and then we're good to go. But again, in terms of eating and also drinking on the bike, what we're really focusing on is those carbohydrate-rich options. So, you know, the typical sort of stuff, we're looking at energy bars, gels, and carbohydrate drinks, as well as electrolytes, depending on preference. Some people prefer to eat their calories, let's say, rather than drink them on the bike. Some people have a combination of the two. But overall, what we're looking to achieve is around 60 to 90 grams of carbohydrates per hour on the bike. So when planning what you're going to take with you, let's say you need to consider, you know, roughly how long you're going to be out for as well. The type of carbohydrate is also important. So if we want to aim at 90 grams per hour, then we definitely need to make sure we're taking on a combination of carbohydrate sources. So a lot of sports nutrition products will have carbohydrate from maybe glucose and also fructose. And that's important because without going into too much detail, that means we can maximize the uptake of glucose and carbohydrate from our guts and get it to our muscles essentially.
Sam, just pulling this into a little bit of like context of this weekend coming up, where people might not be at race intensity, so carbohydrate like burn rate will be lower anyway, but also people are doing this as a completion rather than to compete. You know, they should still, I feel, be thinking about different types of carbohydrate, but, you know, even maybe from real food sources. So, you know, there's like, you can, within real food source, you can get some slow release, some fast release, and that kind of option for people, which, and even I think people that are doing Ironman distance races to complete, you know, that do feel like they need more real food rather than, you know, gels for 14 or 15 hours.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's probably nice to, especially if this is like your longest ride ever, for example, or you're doing this as some sort of challenge, then I think the key thing is just to keep eating. And that can be from those sports nutrition products, but also, you know, take a sandwich along, like peanut butter and jam sandwich is perfect, something like that, to, you know, a bit more kind of real food, if you like. Even like cereal bars, they're not going to have as much carbohydrate in as an energy bar, for example, but it's still a bit more kind of real food. Even bananas.
You by the sounds of it, you're still advising, you know, a bit like in the pre-race day where it was reduction in fat, increase in carbohydrate. And I think like during even that day, even if you stop to get some food on a ride, you've still got to have that principle in mind, haven't you?
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
Yeah.
So, you know, like I say, a lot of people will rely on the gels, the energy bars, the drinks, and the electrolytes. But I think, you know, there is a place for kind of real world food, if we like, you know, something that we might be more accustomed to eating, like a sandwich. I think then that's going to be the differentiation between what we might do this weekend and then in a race.
Yeah, of course.
In a race, my suggestion would be to try and keep it simple and stick to 1 or 2 different types of products. You know, maybe shot blocks and gels, for example, something like that, because then you're not putting too much stress on your stomach, especially when you then move on to the run, to be able to deal with all that mixture, let's say, of different types of carbohydrate. Whereas this weekend we can probably try and get away with that a little bit more.
I suppose another approach to this weekend, and I know we've discussed this before, is like athletes maybe not going full tilt pace wise, but being close enough to it to use this weekend for some like gut training. And you know, if they're going to use 2 different products to race a certain distance, then this is an ideal weekend to just trial it out, see how it feels. You know, and actually it's just practice time, isn't it? You know, under race intensity and stuff. So
yeah, no, That's exactly right. I think, yeah, I mean, for myself, I'll probably try and use this as a bit of a practice for race day nutrition, focus on 1 or 2 products. And particularly if we're aiming to consume a lot of carbohydrates and maybe, you know, towards 80 to 90 grams per hour, we don't do that in training often enough for our bodies to be accustomed to that and actually be able to deal with that from a gastrointestinal stress kind of point of view, and be able to take up those carbs into the body efficiently and use them. So if you're aiming at that high level, then I think this is a particularly good opportunity to practice that race day nutrition that you might, even if it's going to be if you're doing 112 miles this weekend and it's actually a 70.3 that you're doing, it's still an opportunity to practice that.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and I suppose that, you know, the same question is like, you know, when we get to the run on Sunday, you know, you've probably got to change a little bit what you're actually putting in you. But for a lot of people, this will be quite a considerable run. Some people have never ran this far. Same will apply on race day. You know, some people have never exercised for that long. So, you know, what's the approach there on the run, especially with people starting to feel pretty tired, you know, with it being the last discipline?
Yeah, again, it's the same sort of sources of carbohydrate that we're looking at, I guess, gels, energy bars. My suggestion would be to take on things that are a little bit more easy to digest. So some energy bars aren't necessarily easy to digest, so that might infer some GI issues when you're trying to run at the same time. Gels, even the shot blocks or like the chews to a certain extent are not a bad option, particularly for the run. You know, we might say you probably wouldn't start to take on, if you were doing this run fresh-ish, let's say, and like a normal weekend run, you might not start to consume any carbohydrate until after maybe 45 minutes or something. But you could probably start that a little bit earlier, particularly if you're feeling a bit tired after the swim and the bike the days before.
The chances of you having the chances of you being fully loaded on carbohydrate by Sunday morning are pretty slim. So, you know, I don't care what you eat Saturday night. So, yeah, you can't really do yourself much harm by starting a little earlier, I think, this weekend.
No, that's right. And I think the main thing really, and it looks like the weather's picking up a bit for the weekend, is just to certainly start hydrated and then try and maintain some level of hydration through the run. So obviously that's not always easy to do, depending on how quick you try to run. Obviously you can use bottles if you're happy running with a bottle, or a hydration pack. If you're going for, I guess, quite a quick time and you want to loop round past your house 2 or 3 times, then leave a bottle outside and you can have a quick swig as you go past. But I think, yeah, hydration is going to be the key, especially after, as I said, the exertions of the 2 days before.
Yeah.
You will be a little bit dehydrated potentially.
Yeah. Yeah, good. Yeah, so the runs, and then obviously just, you know, in terms of, I suppose, post-race recovery, or, you know, in the context of this weekend, getting ready to go again the next day, which is a little Tour de France-esque, this, isn't it? You know, like it's like a mini stage race going on here. So, you know, how are people like bouncing back from one day to another? And I suppose this has actually, when you're on a hard training week, you know, there's some of this can be brought into your normal training week as well when you're trying to train hard. And I actually think when we're away on training camp, people are, you know, we're doing so much training, people are really observant about stocking up for the next day. And I think at home sometimes that falls by the wayside a little bit because you're just in a more normal circumstance. So it'd just be good to see people increasing their thought process on what they're consuming of an evening over this weekend. So what do you suggest?
The main thing is really just to focus on the refueling. So whether that's after the swim, the bike, and even the run, you know, you've got the following week's training, whatever that is, to kind of think about. So being conscious of refueling ready for the next day is going to be really important, and that's regardless of whether you're competing or aiming to complete. You know, whatever intensity you work at to do these, you will be getting through a huge amount of carbohydrate. So the main thing is to really focus on, within 1 to 3 hours of finishing, You know, the sooner the better. But within 1 to 3 hours, certainly, this is when your body is really ready to kind of take on that carbohydrate that you're going to give it. So try and get a carbohydrate snack or meal in within that 1 to 3 hour kind of window of finishing. And also try and get some protein in as well. So protein wise, you want to get probably 25 to 35 grams of protein in that meal. And in terms of the choice of carbohydrate, this is when it's kind of good to go for high glycemic index or fast release carbohydrate. So a way to kind of distinguish that is to go for refined or white carbohydrates. So white rice, white bread, white pasta. Those are really good options at that time because we can get the carbohydrate and the energy that we need from them to replenish our body stores of glycogen in that time.
So in real world speak, what you're saying is there's a little window for maybe eating a little more naughty than normal here. You know, you don't have to, it's more the case of getting the carbohydrate in than worrying about the wholesomeness of what you're eating in terms of carbohydrate. Obviously, I realise, you know, eating clean as well, you know, and actually replenishing some of the micronutrients and stuff by you know, later in the day, also eating some healthy foods important, but there's definitely always an opportunity to you know, give yourself a bit of freedom with choice of what you eat here, isn't there? So
yeah, definitely, there's definitely an opportunity for that, but focusing again on the carbohydrate. So whilst it is a good opportunity to have something naughty, try and avoid that being kind of a really heavily fat laden meal. So yeah, as long as you're kind of making high carbohydrate choices with some protein in there, then yeah, by all means, it's a good opportunity to kind of maybe sway away from a clean eating approach if that's what you kind of usually would go for. I mean, a good option is a sandwich with white bread, and you know, if your sort of dietary choices allow some kind of meat in that sandwich and some chocolate milk or something, that's something that, you know, you can readily pick up quite easily. So even if you have that as a snack when you first finish and get that in quite quickly, that's a good choice to have.
Yeah.
The other thing to think.
Sorry, Jules, carry on.
I was going to say the other thing to think about is, whilst it's important to refuel, it's also important to rehydrate in that time as well. So as soon as you finish, don't kind of put away the electrolytes and don't think about them until, you know, you pick them up the next day. You know, that's a really good opportunity to keep drinking, particularly when we think about these events happening over 3 or 4 days. You know, start drinking your electrolytes and get rehydrated, ready for the next event. No matter how good your hydration is during, you know, the bike, and you know, you're gonna end up with some level of dehydration. It's pretty good chance of that, no matter how good you are at keeping drinking throughout. So get rehydrating straight away. So just keep on some electrolytes during that time.
Yeah, so I suppose to sum up, I don't know if you want to pull this slide up now, but I suppose to sum up, this slide's available to everyone, but you're also, what you were talking about here is a bit of a unique event that's over multiple days, and that replenishment actually probably comes into our more day-to-day training, doesn't it, than actually a normal one-day race where, you know, you've probably, especially a big long race, you're probably going to have several days of very easy training or even a full recovery week after it, so you've got a little bit more leniency there. Whereas in our day-to-day training lives, this idea of replenishing from very hard sessions to be able to go again the next day is super important, and it can have a big difference between how, you know, how people bounce back from a hard day the day before and what they can get through the next day. So this slide you've pulled up on the screen is obviously like, you've sort of summarized all your key points, but with a timeline across the top. So
yeah, so that's, yeah, essentially these are the key points from what we've just talked about for the last 15 minutes or so. Clearly the focus on carbohydrate before we do any of these events, you know, and that's whether that's the day before or in you know, 2 or 3 hours before as well. You know, primarily the breakfast, for example, particularly focusing on the bike and the run. And then during, just as we said, just use this as an opportunity to almost practice eating. You'll have heard a lot of the pros, for example, talk about Ironman in particular being an eating sort of event in itself. Those that eat best and almost consume the most calories and carbohydrate tend to do the best during the event as well. And you know, when we think about the indicators of performance at Ironman level, then really it's those no one runs out of breath doing an Ironman, let's say, but people run out of carbohydrate, and that's, you know, tends to be the limiter to performance. So if we can use this opportunity to practice eating, drinking a lot of carbohydrates during the bike, and then think about what we can do during the run to maintain our, you know, or maintain some level of carbohydrates, then it's, you know, it's going to be good practice as well, and not just carbohydrates.
Sam, you've just gone quiet on my end. Sorry guys, look, we've just lost them a little bit there. Oh my God.
That just cut out at the end.
Yeah, I think we're still recording actually. Oh well, a little bit of fun. I think we were about 10 seconds away from done then as well, weren't we? Oh well, the issues of home working. Hey, yeah. Well, yeah, it was my internet dropped actually. I do apologise. Doesn't normally do that neither.
Wonder when it dropped out.
I think we were 5 seconds away from the end. So right, I'm going to call an end to this one. So apologies to everyone watching. Little bit of a technical issue at the end. Hope there was no swearing recorded. Yeah, thanks guys for that. And I'm sure that'll help everyone through the weekend. Cheers.
Yeah, good luck everyone. Cheers.